He was trapped behind glass, forgotten under the burning sun, just a dog, they said. But to one young officer, he was more than that. He was a sign, a warning, a beginning. What started as a rescue from a locked car soon unraveled a secret buried deep within the heart of Redwood Hollow, a missing sheriff, a loyal K-9, and a truth no one dared uncover. Until now. What happened next will break your heart and rebuild it, one paw print at a time. Before we begin, have you ever locked eyes with a dog and felt like they knew your soul? Tell me in the comments, what's your dog's name, and what's one thing they've done that you'll never forget? And if you believe that loyalty doesn't end at the door, that no soul, man or dog, should be left behind, hit that subscribe button. Because this is not just a story about rescue, it's about remembering who we are, because of the ones who never forget us. The Arizona sun had no mercy that July afternoon. Redwood Hollow, normally a sleepy desert town dotted with shuttered shops and wide, empty streets, felt like it was smoldering. The sky was a harsh white, glaring down on the cracked pavement of the Frontier Plaza parking lot. The air rippled above the asphalt like heat rising from an oven, warping the world into a shimmering mirage. Officer Eli Thompson stepped out of his patrol car, the soles of his boots sticking momentarily to the blacktop with each step. He wiped a sheen of sweat from his brow, blinking against the sting of light. At 27, Eli had the lean, quiet strength of a man who never quite got used to silence but carried it anyway. His sandy brown hair curled slightly beneath the rim of his hat, and his eyes, gray-blue like the storms that rarely came, missed little. A former high school track star, Eli moved like someone who didn't want to draw attention, but always noticed what others didn't. He had parked his cruiser at the far end of the lot to avoid the midday rush near the diner. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few sun-baked cars, one rusty pickup, and a crookedly parked black SUV. Something about the SUV gave him pause. The angle, the stillness, no engine noise, no shadows of movement, no windshield sunshade either, just dark-tinted glass sealed tight under a suffocating sky. Eli narrowed his eyes behind his sunglasses. His instinct twitched. As he approached the vehicle, the heat became suffocating, thick in his chest. His hand hovered near the hilt of his flashlight, not out of threat, but caution. It wasn't uncommon to find pets locked in cars in Redwood Hollow during the summer, though most were gone before help arrived. Then he saw it. A flicker of motion behind the glass, larger than a puppy still, but clearly in distress. Eli leaned closer. Inside, on the back seat, was a German shepherd. Not a pup, but a full-grown adult, wearing a faded black canine vest. The vest was scuffed and dusty, the name patch unreadable, but still strapped tight across the broad chest of a dog too still for comfort. The shepherd, likely 3 years old, based on build, was curled tightly, chest rising rapidly, tongue dry and lolling, its black and tan coat soaked in sweat. Eli's breath caught. The dog didn't bark. It didn't cry. It only stared at him, dark eyes glossy, searching. There were paw prints smeared across the inside of the window, dozens of them, circles of desperate motion as if he'd tried again and again to escape. "Damn it," Eli muttered, reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I've got a K-9. Repeat, possible police K-9, locked in a vehicle. Heat distress. Frontier Plaza, West Lot." Static replied before the voice crackled through. "Copy that, Unit 3. Animal control is 20 minutes out." 20 minutes. Eli glanced at the sky. It was 103 degrees outside, which meant inside the car, easily 130. He leaned in, voice low. "Hang on, buddy. We're gonna get you out." The dog's ears twitched at the word buddy. His gaze didn't waver. There was understanding in his eyes. A trained dog, a forgotten dog, someone's partner, left to die. Eli's jaw tightened. He stepped back and reached into his cruiser's side compartment, pulling a spring-loaded window punch. A quick check. No ID visible. No tags. The dog's collar had once held something, but it was gone. Just the vest remained. He struck the rear passenger window with a sharp pop. The glass fractured inward, heat pouring out in a wave thick and nauseating. Eli shielded himself, then reached in with his jacket-covered arm. "Easy now," he murmured again. The dog didn't resist. His muscles twitched, but he made no sound. As Eli pulled him out, he could feel the dog's weight. A strong male, maybe 75 pounds, his body trembling with exhaustion. The vest was faded but still fastened, its edges worn with time. The word K9 barely legible on the back. Eli cradled the shepherd gently in his arms and brought him to the patrol car. Inside, he blasted the AC and laid the dog across a blanket in the back seat. He poured water into a bowl, but the dog was too weak to drink. Still breathing, still watching. Eli crouched there for a moment, one hand on the canine's shoulder, feeling the rhythm of shallow breaths. The dog's eyes didn't leave his. He didn't even know the dog's name. But something about the stillness, the focus, it reminded Eli of someone. His father, Daniel Thompson, had died 1 year ago in a wildfire rescue. Eli had shut down ever since. No one could reach him, not his mother, not his old friends. But now, with this dog lying broken but alert beside him, something inside Eli cracked. This canine had been abandoned, left behind, but he had stayed calm, trusted someone would come. That kind of loyalty didn't come from training alone, it came from hope, and now it had reached him. Eli pulled out his phone. "Grace," he said when the line connected. "It's Eli. I need your help. I've got a canine, heat stroke, found him locked in an SUV. He's not chipped, at least not visibly. Can you meet me at the clinic?" Dr. Grace Holloway's voice was sharp. "Bring him in now. I'm prepping the IV." As Eli sped toward the clinic, his mind reeled. There were questions. Who left a trained K9 in a locked car in the heat? Why was he still wearing his vest? Why no reports? He didn't know it yet. But the dog beside him wasn't just any K9. His name was Ranger, and he had never left his last mission. The veterinary clinic stood at the edge of Redwood Hollow, framed by mesquite trees and faded wooden fencing. The late afternoon sun had begun to descend, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. As Eli pulled into the drive, the heat still clung to the air like a memory that wouldn't let go. He parked quickly, stepped out, and gently opened the back door where the German shepherd lay across the blanket, breathing slow and shallow, but alive. The dog's black and tan coat was patchy with sweat and dirt, and the canine vest strapped across his chest was sun-faded, the nameplate too worn to read. But the presence he carried was unmistakable. This was no ordinary stray. This was a dog trained for duty, hardened by time and survival. Inside, the cool, sterile smell of antiseptic hit Eli. The lobby was quiet except for the soft hum of a ceiling fan and a faint country song crackling from an old radio behind the reception desk. A woman in a light blue scrub top appeared from the hallway. She was in her early 30s, tall and slender with sharp cheekbones, pale skin, and chestnut hair tied back in a low bun. Her name tag read Dr. Grace Holloway. Grace's face softened when she saw Eli, but her eyes quickly dropped to the limp form in his arms. Her tone switched instantly to clinical. "Bring him this way." They moved briskly down the corridor to an exam room. Grace motioned to a padded table already prepped with towels and an IV stand. As Eli laid the shepherd down, Grace pulled on gloves and began working, checking pulse, hydration, gum color, pause. Her hands were swift but gentle, and she murmured softly as she worked. "Severe dehydration, mild shock, possibly heat stroke," she said. "And here, see that?" She pointed near the dog's back leg. "Scarring, not fresh, and under the vest line too. These didn't happen in the last few hours." Eli nodded grimly. He wasn't running wild. He's trained, and he's been wearing that vest a long time. Grace nodded, eyes narrowing. "He's 3 or 4 years old, I'd say. Muscle tone still strong, but the way he's curled in on himself, it's more than just heat." Eli watched silently. Grace always had that unshakable calm. As kids, they'd shared everything, until his father's death had changed everything. She'd left for school. He had stayed, burying himself in work and silence. She reached for the chip scanner and ran it slowly along the dog's shoulder and spine. A soft beep broke the quiet. "There's a chip," she said, walking to the computer. She typed quickly, then froze. Her eyes widened. Eli stepped closer. "What is it?" She turned the screen toward him. Registered to Redwood Hollow Police Department. Name, Ranger. Breed, German Shepherd. Age, 3. Assigned to Chief Walter Grady. Eli's chest tightened. "That's not possible. Walter's been missing for 2 weeks." Grace nodded. "Then either someone dumped his dog or someone wanted to make sure Ranger disappeared too." They turned back to the table. Ranger stirred slightly, his ears twitching beneath the weight of the vest. Grace clipped a fluid bag to the IV stand and gently inserted the needle into his front leg. The dog barely flinched. "He's seen something, Eli. These scars? They're too uniform, too deliberate. Looks like confinement, stress injuries, maybe even blunt trauma, repeated over time." Eli's hands curled into fists. "Who hurts a canine? And why would anyone target Walter's partner?" Grace didn't answer. She reached into a drawer and removed a cotton swab. Holding it near Ranger's nose, she released a faint scent. Ash, mixed with chemical residue. The change was instant. Ranger jerked, eyes wide. A guttural whine escaped his throat. He didn't snap, he didn't growl, but he scrambled, desperate to flee, claws sliding against the steel table, breath sharp and shallow. He was reliving something awful. Eli stepped in quickly, wrapping his arms gently around the dog's frame. "Hey, it's okay. You're not there anymore. You're safe." Grace quietly discarded the swab. "Ash residue," she said. "He's associating that scent with trauma, likely fire, or an explosion." Outside the exam room, the breeze picked up dust from the gravel lot. Silence fell for a moment. Eli looked down at the dog's face, alert, wary, but slowly easing under his touch. "You think it's connected to Walter?" Grace asked softly. Eli's jaw clenched. "It has to be. No one just leaves a canine to die, not like that." Grace's hand hovered over Ranger's shoulder for a long moment. "He's lucky you found him." Eli shook his head. "No, I think he found me." Ranger's eyes had begun to drift closed again. The fluids were helping. The canine vest, still on his body, was worn but intact, as if he had held on to it like a lifeline. "I'll keep him overnight," Grace said. "Let his vitals stabilize. We'll know more tomorrow." Eli nodded. "I'll be back first thing." Grace offered a faint smile, the distance between them softening slightly. "You always did carry too much, you know." He gave her a weary half-smile. "Maybe I just got used to the weight." As he stepped out into the desert dusk, the sky was streaked with fading gold and bruised purple. The heat had finally broken, but in his chest something new had taken hold, a connection, a mission, and maybe even a second chance. The next morning in Redwood Hollow came with a rare overcast sky. Wisps of gray clouds crawled slowly over the desert landscape, dimming the sun's usual fury into a filtered haze. The temperature was still oppressive, but it carried a stillness, like something waiting to shift beneath the surface. Eli sat in his cruiser in the back lot of the animal clinic, coffee in one hand, eyes fixed on the windshield. Inside, Ranger, a 3-year-old German Shepherd canine, was still recovering under Grace's watch. He hadn't slept well the night before, haunted by the dog's reaction to smoke and the sick feeling that something bigger was unfolding. He downed the last of the coffee and drove back to where it had all started, the abandoned black SUV. The vehicle had already been impounded and relocated to the rear lot behind the Redwood Hollow PD, surrounded by a chain-link fence and watched over by a lone security camera. With his badge and authorization, Eli requested to inspect the interior before it was processed for disposal. The inside was still scorched from the heat. The rear seat had indentations where Ranger had lain. There were paw smudges on the windows and a faint sour smell of sweat, fur, and plastic that had melted slightly from the sun. Eli moved carefully, gloved up, and opened the glove compartment, finding only a few crumpled receipts and a half-used pack of gum. Then he checked the passenger door pocket and paused. A folded slip of paper, damp and stuck to the inside lining. He tugged it free, unwrapping the brittle, discolored edges. The note was scribbled in hurried pen strokes, the ink smudged in places from moisture or sweat, but the words were still legible. "Don't trust anyone, not even my team. He knows everything." At the bottom, in jagged, nearly illegible script, were two initials. W.G. Walter Grady. Eli stared at the note, heart thudding. Walter must have written this in a rush, maybe just before he vanished. If it had been in this car, that meant Walter had been near the vehicle, or in it, or escaping it. He took a photo of the note, sealed it in an evidence bag, and logged it into his own case file rather than the department system. Not yet. Not if what the note implied was true, that someone inside the station might be involved. When he returned to the clinic later that afternoon, Grace was just finishing a saline drip for Ranger. The dog's eyes tracked Eli immediately, and he raised his head slightly. "He's improving," Grace said without turning, her voice calm but guarded. "He ate this morning. Small bites. He'll need another day or two before he's stable." Grace stood straight and peeled off her gloves. Her face was pale from long hours, and there were faint creases at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. But her voice still carried the same quiet authority she'd had as a girl leading Eli through dusty trails in the hills. Eli pulled out his phone, showed her the photo of the note. "Walter wrote this, found it in the SUV's door. He didn't trust his own team." Grace's brows drew together. "That's terrifying." "I need to figure out who he is," Eli said, lowering his voice, "and I think I know where to start." Grace hesitated, then said, "There's something else." She walked to the clinic's storage cabinet and returned with a small file. Inside was a printout of Ranger's medical history from the K-9 unit. Grace tapped a highlighted line. This was his original handler rotation list. See who used to sign off on his conditioning logs? Eli read the name aloud. Deputy Travis Reed. Grace nodded. "When I said his name earlier in passing, Ranger growled. Not just a warning growl, a full-body reaction. Tail down, teeth bared." Eli remembered Travis, mid-30s, built like a former linebacker, wide shoulders, military buzz cut, and a smile that always seemed a little too polished. He was friendly in public, always shaking hands, known for his charm. But Eli had always felt something off about him, like a mask waiting to crack. "Travis is on night duty this week," Eli said slowly. "Graveyard shifts. I can check the logs." Grace crossed her arms. "Be careful. If Walter thought someone on the inside was a threat, and if Ranger was taken from him, Travis might be more involved than we thought." Later that evening, Eli parked down the block from Travis's residence. It was a one-story house near the outskirts of town, with a gravel driveway and a front porch lined with dusty lawn chairs and a sagging flag. A silver Dodge Ram was parked in the yard. At 11:42 p.m., Eli saw movement. Travis exited the house in plain clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, and a ball cap. He walked briskly to the truck, got in, and pulled away without lights. Eli waited 2 minutes, then followed. They drove for almost 40 minutes into the desert, past the old grain silos, beyond where most locals ever wandered. Finally, Travis's truck turned down an unmarked dirt road and disappeared behind a thicket of mesquite trees. Eli pulled over, cut his headlights, and killed the engine. He waited in silence, heart pounding. What the hell was Travis doing out here? The sky over Redwood Hollow was the color of steel by the time Eli pulled his cruiser off the main road and onto a narrow dirt path that wound through a forgotten stretch of land just south of Mesa Ridge. The landscape shifted from dry, sun-bleached mesquite to denser thickets of juniper and oak, and finally into a sparse grove of pines that bordered an abandoned property once owned by the Holloway Mining Company. At the center of that land stood a structure known to most in town only as the cabin. The cabin had long since fallen out of use, its wooden boards warped and weathered, its roof sagging under decades of neglect. But Walter Grady had once come out here, poking around in connection with an old smuggling case that had resurfaced before his disappearance. Eli knew the place from reports. He'd never been here in person. Today, he brought someone new. Ranger sat in the back seat, wearing his dark canine vest, ears perked, nose twitching, a low whine vibrating in his throat. The German Shepherd, now 3 years old, had regained strength over the past 2 days. His coat, though still healing in patches, held its natural luster again. But it was his eyes, focused, sharp, remembering, that told Eli they were ready. Eli parked, checked the safety on his sidearm, and opened the door. Ranger leapt out, landing light-footed despite the desert dust. He moved with purpose, nose to the wind, tail high, not like a lost dog, but like a soldier returning to the field. The porch creaked under their weight as they approached. The cabin door hung crooked, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, the air was musty and stale. A broken lantern lay across a table. Old crates were stacked in the corners. Ranger circled, sniffing intently, then froze near the fireplace. Tail rigid, ears forward. Eli stepped closer. There, beneath a dusty rug, was a section of the floor with slightly newer boards. Eli knelt, ran his fingers along the seam, and pried it up with the edge of his flashlight. A narrow wooden hatch, latched from the outside. He lifted it, and a cold breath of air spilled out, earthy and metallic. Ranger stared down, then descended without hesitation. Eli followed, gun drawn, flashlight cutting through the dark. The cellar was small, concrete walls, a rusted table, empty shelves, and something in the corner, a stained cloth bundle tucked beside a toolbox. Eli knelt and unfolded it. A sheriff's badge. Dried blood etched across its face. The name was barely visible beneath the crusted lines, but it was there. Walter Grady. Eli's stomach turned. God! Then, movement. Above them, a creak, a footstep, and suddenly the hatch slammed shut. The room darkened, silence pressing in like a vice. Then, a shadow lunged. Eli barely turned in time to catch the figure. A tall man in desert camo, face masked, came down hard, forearm to Eli's throat. They wrestled, boots scraping concrete, breaths sharp. Eli's gun clattered to the floor. The masked man overpowered him until a bark cut through the chaos. And then fury. Ranger launched from the shadows, 3-year-old muscle and memory coiled into one devastating force. He sank his teeth into the man's arm, tearing him away from Eli. The man shouted, stumbled, tried to escape. Eli gasped for air, grabbed the flashlight, and scrambled to his feet just in time to see the assailant climb the ladder and vanish into the trees beyond. No shot, no ID, just blood on the floor. Ranger stood alert beside Eli, panting hard. Blood streaked across his vest, but unhurt. His eyes didn't waver. "You just saved my life," Eli said hoarsely, bending down to rest his hand on the dog's shoulder. Again. They found no phone, no supplies, no fingerprints, just a badge soaked in silence. That evening, Eli went to visit someone who hadn't asked questions in a long time, his mother, Martha. The porch of her house glowed amber in the desert dusk. She stood there with a broom, her silver braid falling down one shoulder, eyes narrowing the moment she saw him. "Eli," she said quietly, "you've been digging." He nodded. "I found Walter's badge. Someone attacked me before I could leave with it." Martha sat down slowly beside him and handed him something from her apron, a faded photo. Eli, as a boy, sitting on a bench between 2 men, his father and Walter, arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiling. "He was your godfather," she said. "Your father trusted him more than anyone." Eli stared at the photo, at the men who raised him to believe in right and wrong. "If Walter's out there," she said softly, "you'll bring him home. I know you will." He looked down at Ranger, seated loyally beside him, and nodded. This was no longer just a case. It was a promise. The moon rose behind a veil of clouds, casting a silver sheen over the deserted backroads that wound out of Redwood Hollow. The air had cooled, but the weight of it still lingered, thick with unspoken tension. Eli gripped the steering wheel, his eyes focused ahead. headlights carving tunnels of light through the brush. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, alert and breathing steadily. The German shepherd had been pacing restlessly since dusk, ears twitching, tail stiff, like he was waiting for something. At 9:17 p.m., he'd stood abruptly, walked to the front door of Eli's house and barked once, a sharp, certain command. Eli trusted that bark. 15 miles southeast of town, Ranger stirred again, ears snapping forward as they passed a faded wooden marker, Canyon Creek Logging Company. Decommissioned 1997. Eli slowed. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then vanished into a narrow trail barely wide enough for a vehicle. He stopped and cut the engine. The night fell silent. They walked the rest on foot, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over twigs and dry pine needles. The trees thickened with every step, shadows pooling at their feet like water. Ranger moved with purpose, sniffing low to the ground, then picking up speed until he broke into a jog. Eli followed. After 15 minutes, the trees opened into a clearing. At the center stood a structure, an old supply barn, its siding rusted and roof half collapsed. Vines had begun to reclaim the lower walls, and rusted tools leaned forgotten against the frame. A faint metallic scent floated through the air, like blood or old oil. Ranger stiffened, nose pointed at the wall on the far side. Then, without warning, he barked. Loud, harsh, and unrelenting. Eli stepped quickly to his side, shining his flashlight where the dog stared. The beam revealed weather-worn wood, mostly intact, but one section was mismatched, newer, less aged. Eli ran a hand over it. It echoed slightly, unlike the rest. Hollow, he muttered. He looked around, found a broken pickaxe near a collapsed wheelbarrow, and pried at the slats. The wood splintered easily. Behind it was a thin sheet of plywood. One more strike, and the whole panel gave way. Behind it, there was a narrow entrance, barely 3 feet wide, leading into a hidden room within the barn's foundation. The air that rushed out smelled of sweat, damp metal, and old food. Ranger, still lean and agile at 3 years old, growled softly and entered first. Eli crouched low, flashlight sweeping the chamber. It wasn't large, bare concrete walls, a cot with a torn blanket, several discarded food wrappers, a dented thermos, and a crate that had once held MREs. A corner held what looked like a portable toilet setup. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, but the signs of long occupancy were undeniable. On a metal folding table were maps, topographical layouts of Redwood Hollow and surrounding counties. Dots marked remote locations, along with dates, some crossed out. A weathered military-grade radio sat next to them, battery pack missing. On the wall behind the table, someone had scratched a tally, 3 columns of vertical lines, each day counted one by one. 46 days. Eli's heart pounded. Walter had been missing for 15. Had he been here before that? And why was it abandoned now? He grabbed a plastic bag from his field kit and began collecting evidence. Just as he zipped the bag shut, Ranger barked again, this time toward the door. A second later, there was a low, cracking sound from the forest. Eli turned off the flashlight and crouched, gun drawn. Ranger pressed against his side. Footsteps. 2 sets. Slow, cautious. Then one voice, low, male, southern drawl. "You sure no one's been back?" A pause. A second voice, more gravelly, replied, "We sealed it up tight after they moved him. Dog's gone. Place is dead." They were close. Eli didn't move. Ranger didn't breathe. The voices faded. Then the sound of retreating footsteps. A truck starting. Tires rolling across dirt. After a long silence, Eli exhaled. He turned the flashlight back on. They moved him. Ranger looked up, as if understanding. Meanwhile, back in town, Grace sat in her dimly lit kitchen, her laptop glowing on the wooden table. Her eyes were tired but focused, reading line after line of Walter's investigation notes, unofficial copies she had saved over the years. She had always respected Walter for his instincts. He'd known there was corruption brewing beneath Redwood Hollow's surface. He'd just never been able to prove it. Tonight, something caught her attention. An email from 5 months ago, titled Canyon Creek Patterns. In it, Walter detailed a suspected arms smuggling route using old logging roads and storage barns. The note included times, suspected aliases, and 2 initials in bold. TR. Grace's stomach dropped. She knew those initials. So did Eli. She copied the email, attached the photo of Walter's badge Eli had sent, and wrote a short note. I believe this case involves federal crimes and internal corruption. We need help. Contact me ASAP. She sent it to a friend she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. FBI Special Agent Naomi Brooks, a black woman in her 40s with braided hair, a steady demeanor, and a reputation for blowing open rural conspiracy cases. Naomi had once mentored Grace's college roommate. That was all the connection Grace had, but it would have to be enough. Back at the barn, Eli sealed the entrance again and marked the spot discreetly with a red cloth tied around a nail, barely visible from the outside. Ranger leaned against his side as they stepped into the night. The forest around them was silent once more, as if the trees themselves were listening. They didn't speak, not that Eli expected Ranger to, but as they walked back through the woods, the dog stayed close, steps matching his, heartbeat steady beside him. Walter had been there. They were getting closer. The forest air was still damp with the scent of pine and rust when Eli made his way back toward the main trail, having hidden the evidence from the barn deep in his pack. Ranger trotted beside him, ears swiveling with each sound, but the tension had loosened from his shoulders. They were making progress, and Eli could feel it. The night whispered around them, dark and watchful, but he felt oddly clear, until the branch snapped behind him. He spun, hand on his weapon, but before he could draw it, something heavy struck him across the back of the neck. His knees buckled. Ranger lunged, snarling, but a sharp, high-pitched whistle rang out, stopping the dog mid-leap. Eli's vision swam. His last glimpse before the darkness took him was Ranger, 3 years old, strong and sleek, standing frozen, caught between instinct and training. When he woke, his wrists were bound behind a steel chair, his head pounding. The room was dimly lit, the concrete floor cold beneath his boots. His badge and sidearm were gone, and a ragged cloth had been stuffed in his back pocket like an insult. He heard footsteps, 2 pairs, and a muffled voice nearby. He shouldn't have come back here. Another voice, deeper and more familiar, replied, He doesn't know anything. Not yet, but he's too close, just like Walter was. Then silence. Eli tested the ropes, tight, but not expertly done. He listened, holding his breath. No barking, no Ranger. His gut twisted, not with fear, but anger. They'd separated him from the only one he trusted. Back in town, at the Redwood Hollow Animal Clinic, Grace was finishing up a late-night check on a recovering husky when she heard the scratching at the front door. At first, she thought it might be wind, but then came a whimper, low, familiar. She rushed to the front and pulled open the door. Ranger stood there alone, his fur wet from dew, eyes wide and wild, breathing heavy from running. His front leg bore a scrape, and his collar was twisted. He barked once, sharp and demanding, then turned and sprinted down the street. "Ranger!" Grace called after him, but the dog didn't stop. She grabbed her coat and keys, tossed her phone in her bag, and followed. Ranger led her in a zigzag across back roads past the edge of town to a wide stretch of dirt lined with old storage sheds, relics from Redwood Hollow's mining days. The wind had picked up, dry and electric. As Grace approached, she saw one of the warehouse doors slightly ajar. Ranger paused at the threshold, looking back at her, tail stiff. She entered slowly, her flashlight casting long, swinging shadows. The air was thick with the smell of oil and metal, and under that, sweat. Then she heard it. A muffled cough, a scuffle of boots, someone groaning. She found Eli tied to a chair in the far corner, blood on his temple, his jaw clenched, but eyes alert. "Grace," he rasped. She rushed forward, already cutting the ropes with a surgical blade from her pocket. Are you hurt?" "Nothing broken, just bruised ego." As she helped him up, they heard footsteps echo through the far corridor. Ranger growled deep and low. "We have to move," Eli whispered. They ducked behind a metal rack of spare tires as two men entered from the rear, a tall man in camouflage and a shorter figure in a ball cap. Their backs were to them, but Grace caught a flash of something metallic in the shorter man's hand, a phone. The taller one grunted. "That cop's not going anywhere. I'll dump him by the river come dawn." "And the dog? He's tagged. We'll find him." Eli's eyes narrowed. The voice was unmistakable. Deputy Travis Reed. As the two men moved deeper into the warehouse, Eli motioned for Ranger. The German shepherd slinked forward, nearly silent, and vanished into the shadows. Moments later, the taller man let out a yelp. "Something bit me." "Where?" Travis hissed. A crash echoed. Ranger had knocked over a rack of empty crates. The noise gave Eli the cover he needed. He and Grace slipped toward the exit, but not before Grace reached into the man's coat pocket during the confusion and snatched the phone. Outside, they ran through the side alley, Ranger circling back to join them. Back at the clinic, Eli slumped into a chair as Grace connected the phone to her laptop. Locked, but not encrypted. Photos, messages, call logs, most of them nondescript, until Grace opened the folder labeled simply Archives. Inside were recordings, audio files with timestamps. She clicked on one. A voice echoed through the room. Travis's. "You should have finished Grady when you had the chance. The dog's already messed up everything." Then another voice, older, raspier. "The dog's loyal. That's the problem. He went back." "Doesn't matter. Walter's not getting out." Eli's hand curled into a fist. They had Walter. Somewhere. And now they had proof. Morning in Redwood Hollow arrived shrouded in a low-lying fog, thick and restless, like the breath of the forest itself had rolled into town. The mist coiled through the streets and gathered in the hollows between trees, softening sound and turning everything ghost-like. It was the kind of morning where secrets felt heavy in the air, and shadows lingered longer than they should. Inside the vet clinic, the lights were low. Grace stood near the back exam room, fitting a dark tactical vest onto Ranger. The old K9 unit vest was faded, but still serviceable, repurposed for one final mission. She clipped a small black camera to the collar strap, its red light blinking faintly. "There," she said softly, tightening the final strap. "You're ready." Ranger, just 3 years old, stood tall and still, his posture composed. The young German shepherd had changed in the last 48 hours, more focused, more resolute, like he understood what was coming. Eli watched from across the room, his arm still bandaged from the warehouse, a bruise darkening his cheek. His expression was grim, but steady. "Let's run it one more time," he said. They had built the plan in less than 12 hours with help from Grace's FBI contact. Special Agent Naomi Brooks had arrived at dawn, her SUV pulling into the back lot like a whisper. Naomi was a composed woman in her early 40s, tall, with warm brown skin and neatly braided hair that stopped at her shoulders. Her voice was even, her movements precise. She wore a dark gray suit under a tactical vest and had the calm confidence of someone who had survived worse than bullets. She reviewed the setup one last time with them. "We know Travis believes he's in the clear," Naomi said. "He's using the old ranger's cabin near White Pine Ridge for storage and temporary holding. What he doesn't know is that we intercepted a scheduled drop, a fake exchange of cash and rifles that we'll control. Your job, Officer Thompson, is to be there when the truth surfaces." Eli nodded. "He won't expect Ranger." "No," Naomi replied, "but Ranger will be our eyes." They left mid-morning. The fog hadn't lifted. The trees surrounding White Pine Ridge swallowed the road until it felt like they were entering a dream. The cabin sat at the edge of a ravine, weathered but sturdy, its roof patched with aluminum sheets and its windows half covered by dark cloth. A battered green truck, Travis's, was already parked outside. Eli, Grace, and Naomi hid their vehicles off the main road and circled the ridge on foot. Ranger moved ahead, weaving through tree trunks like a shadow, the camera on his chest sending a live feed to Naomi's tablet. They reached the rear slope at 10:43 a.m. Naomi set up a parabolic mic, aimed it toward the cabin. The static gave way to two voices inside. "Drop's late," one said. Then Travis, "Doesn't matter. Grady's not going anywhere. One more night. After that we clean house." Grace stiffened. Her fingers gripped her radio. "Wait for the cue," Naomi said calmly. Inside the cabin, Walter Grady sat slumped in a wooden chair. His hair was grayer, thinner, his frame leaner from weeks of captivity. His wrists were bound with worn rope, and his right eye was swollen. But he was breathing, conscious, and waiting. Ranger reached the front porch, crouched low, and waited for Eli's signal. Eli stepped out from behind the trees and approached slowly, rifle slung across his back. He called out, loud enough for the mic to pick up, "I brought what you asked." Inside, Travis turned toward the door, face hidden by shadow, but voice unmistakable. "You came alone?" "No," Eli said. "I brought the dog." Travis stepped out onto the porch, face pale and drawn tight. He wore his department badge and his standard-issue holster. "Where's the cash?" "You'll get it when I see Walter." Behind him, Walter shifted slightly in the chair, and for a brief second their eyes met. Then Travis smirked and drew his weapon. It happened fast. Ranger, the 3-year-old canine, lunged from the side, tackling Travis by the arm just as the first shot rang out into the fog. Eli ducked, drew his sidearm, and rushed forward. Travis hit the ground hard with Ranger gripping his forearm, teeth locked. Walter shouted hoarsely, "Ranger!" Naomi and Grace sprinted in from the rear. Grace ran to Walter, cutting his ropes with the blade she always kept in her coat. Walter slumped forward, breath shallow. Naomi handcuffed Travis as he groaned, blood soaking into his shirt sleeve. Within seconds, backup arrived. 2 agents in tactical gear rushing to secure the cabin. Grace turned Walter's face gently toward her. His lips moved, barely audible. "Is it him?" Ranger padded over, muzzle still stained. He sat beside Walter and nudged the man's arm. Walter reached up with a trembling hand and touched the dog's shoulder. Then he saw it. Inside the old canine vest, worn but intact, was the phrase he himself had carved years ago for his partner. "If I fall, find the light." Walter's voice cracked. Tears filled his eyes. "I knew you'd come back, boy. I never stopped believing." 3 weeks had passed since the foggy morning at White Pine Ridge. Redwood Hollow was quieter now, as if the town itself had let out a breath it had been holding for too long. The last of the federal vehicles had rolled out 2 days ago, and Travis Reed was in custody, awaiting federal charges for conspiracy, illegal arms trafficking, and attempted murder of a law enforcement officer. Word spread quickly in a small town, but this time it came with a strange sense of peace. Walter Grady, though still weak, had recovered faster than doctors expected. The old sheriff had a quiet resilience, the kind built from decades of watching good men fall and holding the line anyway. He now walked with a cane, an old hickory piece once gifted by his late wife, but the fire in his eyes had returned. His beard had gone white, and his voice was softer, but when he walked into the Redwood Hollow precinct one last time, every officer stood. Eli met him on the front steps. "You sure about this?" Eli asked. Walter looked at the leash in his hand, attached to the German shepherd who now sat obediently at his feet. "I am. He's done more than enough for me." Ranger, now fully recovered, looked from Walter to Eli, ears up, tail swaying slightly. His coat was glossy again, and his gait was strong. He wore a new collar, deep brown leather with a brass plate that read, "Ranger, honor always." Walter bent down slowly, ruffled the fur between the dog's ears. "He was my partner, but he's your soul, Eli. You two? You understand each other, maybe more than I ever could." Eli swallowed. "You don't want to keep him?" Walter smiled faintly. "If I'd needed him to stay, he wouldn't have left. But he followed you. That tells me everything I need to know." And with that, the leash changed hands. Ranger padded beside Eli down the steps. No commands, no hesitation, just a quiet, natural rhythm between two beings who had walked through fire and come out the other side. In the weeks that followed, Eli's world shifted in small, almost imperceptible ways. He still patrolled Redwood Hollow, still wore the same uniform and holster, still drank the same bitter coffee from the corner diner. But now, Ranger sat beside him in the cruiser, nose at the window, ears twitching with every sound. They worked in unison, silent looks, small gestures, a bond formed in rescue and sealed in trust. Eli began showing up to neighborhood meetings. At first, just to stand in the back, but soon he started speaking, offering safety updates, answering questions, even joking now and then. Grace noticed the change. On one late afternoon, as the desert sun bled into gold, Grace stood on Eli's porch watching him hammer a new hook beside the front door. He stepped back, lifted a small framed drawing, and hung it carefully. It was crayon on white paper, a house with a red roof, a stick figure Eli beside a perfectly round Ranger. Beneath it, in shaky block letters, were the words, "To the brave dog who guards my street." Signed, Lily, age 6. Lily was a sweet girl from 3 doors down, blonde curls, missing front teeth, and a habit of leaving chalk paw prints along the sidewalk. Her parents, Derek and Amanda, had introduced themselves the week after the rescue. Lily had seen Ranger on his first walk through the neighborhood and waved so hard she fell off her scooter. "She's a good kid," Eli said, stepping back. Grace nodded. "And you're doing good things." He looked at her. "You think so?" "I know so." The two stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft breeze rustling the porch flags and the distant bark of a dog. Inside, Ranger lay on the rug near the fireplace, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed. "You know," Grace added, "you've changed." Eli smirked. "Not that much." She raised an eyebrow. "You're talking to people. You're smiling. You're letting Ranger sleep on the couch." "Okay," he said with a laugh. "Maybe a little." They walked inside together. The house felt warmer now, lived in. A framed photo of Eli's father sat on the mantel beside one of Walter taken the day he retired. Ranger's vest, cleaned and carefully folded, hung above them like a quiet reminder of everything they'd been through. That night, Eli sat on the back steps watching the stars blink through the haze. Ranger lay beside him, head against his leg. Eli rubbed the dog's neck absently. "You know," he said quietly, "I think I needed you more than I knew." Ranger didn't move, but his tail thumped once. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The world spun on. But under that one roof, man and dog, 2 scarred, loyal souls, had finally found something rare. A home. Ranger didn't just survive, he came back with purpose. He uncovered truth, reunited a broken brotherhood, and became more than a K9, he became a light in the dark. In a town where silence had buried too many secrets, Ranger barked, dug, and refused to let the past stay hidden. He didn't just find a new home with Eli, he rebuilt one. Maybe you've felt like Eli, bruised by loss but still moving forward. Or like Walter, alone, waiting for someone to remember. Or maybe, like Ranger, you fought through fire to stand beside the ones who needed you most. This wasn't just a rescue, it was redemption. It was proof that loyalty doesn't fade with time and that healing can walk on 4 legs. If this story touched something in you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear about your hero. And hit subscribe if you believe that every soul, human or canine, deserves to be remembered, protected, and loved. May God bless you, and may your life always have a Ranger watching the door.